Hello everyone. I wanted to do a quick tutorial on how to do WebSockets. I know some of you for your final project are interested in doing WebSockets or doing like network things like live player feedback and things like that. I think WebSockets will be like a helpful way to accomplish that. Unfortunately, no people on the course staff are super familiar with WebSockets. Um, and it was kind of a lab that we retired in previous years, but looking to just bring back the core material of it, just to show you guys how WebSockets work and how you can use them for your final project. Cool. Um, so the first thing is, I was here earlier. Um, this is like the link that I got the base tutorial for the WebSockets off of. It's in like the README of this repo, which I'll share at the end of the video. Um, and that links to this tutorial, which tells you all like the dependencies you need to put in your pom.xml, and then gives you some good starter code to get started with. So I've kind of just deciphered it and made it a little more interesting. And added an application that could probably be more relevant to your projects. But if you just want to see the original one, it's all here. And mine is just a little modification to that to be helpful. Cool. So I think it might benefit us to just start with a demo for what I want to show. So this is my chat. It's like effectively my main.java because it has like the public static void main string args, right? So that's like effectively means that's like a main.java sort of file. Um, and I didn't actually put like the /run and stuff here. Um, but you can imagine that I can run it and but for the purpose of this, I'm just going to use Eclipse's way of running it to run it. So I'm going to create it, and I created a route for the WebSockets, and that just allows us to go into my browser, localhost 4567/WebSockets, which was the same route we saw earlier. And so I can put in a room number, not very descriptive or visually appealing, but you can put in like a room number. So if I want to start a room called room 100, and I can enter the room, sorry, and it says hurry to use the chat. And that's kind of like the default functionality that was included in the original server. Not the put in your username and enter room number, but just like this kind of template is like all CSS. It's like all the CSS and Java. Most of the JavaScript was already rendered there for me. And I can say hi. Um, cool. And so I can open up another browser tab and go to the same link, and I'll say room 100. I'll say my name is Gary here. That's my friends used to call me sometimes in high school. So now we see Gary and Hari are both in the room. So Gary can say hi, Hari. And if we just tab over here, we'll see that Gary's message. And I can say hi, Gary, back. And we'll see that here. Um, and the way I set it up is because you have to put in your room number. So if I wanted to put like another room and I want to call it Barry, um, then this room is 101, and so Barry joined the chat. As I am Barry. Yep. And then we can have someone else join the chat for room 101. Oops. Click enter. Okay. Start typing. And this guy can be Nary. Oops. Should be 101. Nary. Yep. And Nary and Barry in the same room. And then so like Nary can say hi Barry, and then maybe Barry says long time no see, so something absurd like that. Yeah, and so that's the basic functionality. I didn't put a lot of checks in, so like one issue that you can come off is like if you like edit the HTML, like there's some like vulnerabilities. You can also enter the same name twice. So, for example, like if I wanted to uh, join room 101 and name myself also Barry, like again, like have two Barrys in the same room. See that there's two Barrys, and it's like because of the way that this renders, there's no way to tell which Barry is which. Um, yeah, but that's something obviously that I didn't bother to take care of just for the sake of this video. But if that's something that you need for your own final project, then I'd encourage you to look into it. Cool. So I want to kind of get into the details for how I coded this and what modifications I made in order to make it work. So the first thing that we'll need to know is a WebSocket. So a WebSocket is like a little web network thing, like this WebSocket, that allows two different people to communicate with the same network. Might be just good to look at the official definition of a WebSocket from like Mozilla. And so a WebSocket object provides API for creating and managing a WebSocket server connection. And the WebSocket is an advanced technology that makes it possible to open a two-way interactive communication session between the user's browser and a server. And so that server that we're setting up is that Java backend, and some of the browser stuff is taken care of in the front end with some JavaScript and HTML. Yeah, cool. So it might benefit us to start just with the Ftl file, and then we'll move into the Java file. So the Ftl file just has this is like the title set of the thing, choose a char set, and then this is what I added from the tutorial is this little form here. I don't know why I named this method logger, but this is what I added, and so you put in the room number and you put in the name, and that takes you to the next place where you can actually hook up to the WebSocket. Obviously, right, there's not too much security here, right? I'm kind of just using like required to make sure that they put in the room number and like the number tag to make sure that it's a number. But like someone could like use the console as I'm sure you guys have used and like infect the page. Same thing with the name. They add their name, and yeah, that's just what I added. And this is the chat controls. And so this is just like the list of users, which was this lad, if you remember, this Nary Berry Berry. That's the list of users, and the chat is this. Yeah, and so we end up populating that with other portion with the JavaScript stuff, and obviously like the message is like this little form here. Cool. Now let's go to the JavaScript and see how this works. So I start off by initializing the WebSocket URL and the WebSocket to null. And that's just to define them as global variables that are instances of the session. And the session is pretty much like the browser experience that you have open right now. In this case, in this example, a specific tab. And so this is all the default code. So this takes send, which is this button here, this one. So it says get the guy with ID send and add an event listener such that when you click on send, we call the send message function. The same thing happens, right? When you click enter, then you should also send the message with the value of like the message, right? Is what this is. And this send message was also from the whatchamacallit, the the stencil code that I found. And so if the message isn't empty, then we're just going to call WebSocket.sendMessage. And the WebSocket is like this guy, which we'll get to later. And then we'll reset the value, right? So if you see like, I say hi, then this goes back to empty. So that's what this is. This update chat is pretty much what happens when we get data back from the WebSocket. And you'll see that we set that here, right? So on message, we do update chat. And so we get the data back in the form of a JSON, and we'll look at how we create that JSON in the Java code. And we insert into chat. If you remember, chat was this. Effectively, the user message, which is one of the parameters of the JSON, which would be like, I believe this, right? So it would be like hi or like blah, 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 something like that. In the user list, we empty and we send back the user list every time, and it just populates the user list too. And this return false, I added this myself. I think it's supposed to keep the WebSocket from expiring. What I've noticed is my WebSockets expire after like 5 minutes, and then the server kind of dies in the back end. I don't know if that's just because it idles, or if because I'm not doing that thing in the like, or because I wasn't returning false, but I just added that there. And these are just helper functions, right? So like this .id is just pretty much doing document.get element by ID. So we use that here. It's actually pretty interesting. I never thought about doing this before, but like this is really arduous to type. So this ID function, I think I might start using it too. Um, and this insert pretty much just inserts the like HTML, right? So it's like we use the insert function here, and it's like you insert it to like the chat tag, all this stuff. So yeah, and this is also part of the stencil code. Out of this part of my testing, and I kind of just left it in there. And then this is the stuff that I added that allows for the multi-room stuff. So the eat-up-prevent default prevents like the form from like reloading the page or something like that. And then this form hidden ID chatter hidden pretty much means that when you submit this form, then the form disappears and this disappears. Because I was having an issue where you could just join the room a bajillion times. Obviously, you can still do that since I've only put in some HTML measures to prevent that, but I'm sure you guys can think of more complicated solutions to that problem that'll actually really target it at the root. And then I get the room.value and the username.value, which are, if you remember, these two things in the form. Um, so I get those from here, so I can pretty much create the user. And then what I do is I say web. So this is like a WebSocket URL. So it's like sometimes you have like http:// If you have a WebSocket, you use ws:// Location.hostname is as localhost. Port is 4567, and then chat username equals yada yada yada. I'll get into that later, but effectively, um, you can't parametricize the other arguments in the URL. So it's like you can't go to what's an example of a URL you can do that too. Like for example, on Reddit, right? If you go to like reddit.com/r/ like vegan, for example, then or like slash like League of Legends, for example, you kind of get different web pages. You can't really do that with WebSockets, or at least I didn't find a way how to do that. So what I did is I added it as like the query params in the URL. So I just say username equals username, and then the room equals the room number. Just log that for my own sake. And then this guy up here, the WebSocket and WebSocket URL, we're going to instantiate with this URL. And that pretty much sends the onConnect message. And then we're going to say whenever this WebSocket receives a message, we're going to take in that message and we're going to call the update chat function, which if you recall, populates this chat. And whenever it closes, it's going to do an alert on the JavaScript page or on the page. And an alert is just like, warning, like this tab is. Sometimes we get them for like cab, I believe. It's if it's like your session is about to time out. Please log in the next 3.5 minutes to keep it alive. So that's what an alert is in JavaScript. Cool. So that's the JavaScript. Let's get into the. Give me a second. I edited something. Yeah. So we can get into what I did in the job. Yeah. Yeah. This is an alert. Um. Cool. So let's get into the Java. So this first thing is like I just created the home page. So that's what this like get WebSocket is. And this is like class implements template view route. I think you guys did this in one of the labs. And it just returns websocket.ftl, which is just like this page, right? So yeah, so when you go to localhost 4567/ws WebSocket, is what it's short for, you just get this unrendered page. And then here's the really interesting part. So I'm going to start with this, which is I create a map from the session to this class I created called user info, which holds three things: the session, the room number, and the username. And it just returns them. That's all it does. I don't create a defensive copy or anything like that. Wasn't looking to get too fancy or anything. Certainly could if you wanted to. And so this user's map holds all of the information that we will need to access the user's uh, information when we want to choose what room to send a message to. This is just like saying like my files are in this public folder. Create the engine. You can just use this one. That just creates the FreeMarker engine, and the FreeMarker engine is just what renders the FTL files. So you have chat, which is our main thing. And yeah, so that's our main thing. So remember how I was mentioning earlier that there's kind of like three things. There's um, on connect, which happens effectively when you do this, and there's on message and on close. So we have these little decorators here on WebSocket connect, on WebSocket close, and on WebSocket message that are pretty much able to handle all those cases. So on WebSocket connect, I have some print statements here because I was doing some debugging, but it might be beneficial for me to get rid of them. I guess it's fine probably. So this is the local address, which I guess I found was ultimately unuseful. Then I was printing out to make sure that it was calling it. Um, and then I have this get remote address, which also, it's like the address of the WebSocket. So each WebSocket actually, if you remember the definition of WebSocket when we were looking at it here, it was like the WebSocket communicates between the browsers, the user's browser and the server. It's like, that's like the ID of the browser, I believe. This like 5383 or 53853. Um, and is how we get are able to communicate. It's like that's the remote address, and the local address is 4 5. That's like 4567. So local address is the Java backend, and 53. These numbers are the specific instance of a tab that has a WebSocket. Just if you're interested. And so this like URL string is like this. So this is actually what I was looking for with all those print statements. And it's how I'm able to get the username and room. And that's kind of what this monstrosity is I extract the room by using like string splitting and extract the username by doing this. This is like not the most efficient way of doing things. It was just kind of my gut instinct of like I kind of have some certain guarantees about how I'm sending the information back. I know I'm sending the username first, and I know I'm sending the room second, and I know that I can split by these. But obviously this wouldn't always work. Right? For example, like I know I could crash this. For example, if I set my room equal to like room equals and like my username equals like username equals. Not that I'm going to do that, but it's just something you might want to check um before you do that, or like have some check in the JavaScript that's like, hey, you can't do that, like that's a bad name, something like that. Um or maybe have a more efficient way of checking that sort of stuff in the JavaScript. Anyway, moving on, I create the user info, so I extract the room, extract the username, um and the session is really important. It's pretty much what we get every single time. It's like an unchanging object that's associated with a session, like with a WebSocket session, right? And so it's like, imagine like one session is like one instance of like this 53861. So this is a session, this is a session, this is a session, no, this is a session, and so we're effectively putting the session into them into this chats.users, which is a static variable. Remember, so it's able to be accessed across all the different browser tabs that we're accessing. Yep, so I put it in, and then I send a message from the, like I said, the server is the, so if I join group 9, it's JJ. It's a server, right? And then it's JJ join the chat, right? So username join the chat is the message. And then it's a group 9, which was the room I sent it to. And we'll get more intimate with this broadcast message a little bit later. And so when I close the WebSocket, right, actually, I guess, let me join the WebSocket again. So I'll join room 9 as Barry. And so we'll see that Barry joined the chat. We'll close it out. And then we'll see Barry left the chat, right? So that's what happens when I close, right? It broadcasts to everybody in the room that I left the chat, or like that Barry left the chat. And this is kind of just getting the username from this user info class that I showed you earlier, and getting the room, so we know what room to send it to and like what the message should say. So it's like Barry left the chat instead of like somebody left the chat, right? I think it's a more informative message. And this on message is kind of just the generic thing, right? So whenever you send a message to this, right? So if we recall from here, right, we call this send, the WebSocket.send. And that's pretty much just on message is what it's called. Or that's actually, the send is like a local variable. Or no. Yeah, we call, yeah, sorry about that. So we set we send, which is like a property of the WebSocket from the official like Mozilla. Um, yeah, so it's like the send data links up with this decorator of on WebSocket message, and we pass in a message, and we get the session again, of course, just like we get a session here. We get the username associated with that session by accessing the hash map, get the room based on the user, and then we broadcast the message with exactly the message that the user wanted to send to the room. So if any of that's confusing, unfortunately, I'm not doing this live, but feel free to, ask me, email me, post on Headstem, probably the best way, because if you're confused, probably also your peers are confused. Cool. Um, so the final thing that we'll need to look at to get this to work is this broadcast message function, which, if you recall, right, all of these guys call it, right? It's pretty much how we send it to the front end. And so I think the way I did this, I modified this from the initial stencil is pretty clever. But you guys can probably let me know if you have any better ideas. So we have to effectively get the sessions that we want to send a given message to, right? And how do we know what sessions we want to send it to? Well, we know what room they're in. And we want to send the user list back, which is like this guy. That's kind of the tertiary, I would even argue, concern. Um, And so we have to look at all of the user infos that we've put inside our concurrent hash map. And remember that anytime somebody joins our WebSocket, right, we're adding them into our hash map, right? We're taking their session and we're putting it into the hash map, right? And so we take all of them and we say, hey, look, if your room, the room that you're associated with, is the same room that the person who's trying to send the message is associated with, um, then we're going to add you to our sessions to send. And also we're going to add your name to our usernames, right? So this is how we get the people in the room to whom we want to send the message to, right? It's based on what this room is, and that room we store when we first create the person by getting it, or we first create the user info that we're putting inside the map, and we get that from the URL. And so then we say sessions to send.stream. I'm not super sure what this .stream does, but the stencil code has it, so I'm going to use it. I guess it just returns it as a stream, which I guess is good. I guess it allows you to probably do this filter and for each. And so filter just makes sure that the session is open, so you don't want to be sending messages to closed WebSockets. I guess you probably could with not too much error, but just don't. I guess you probably might get an error. I never tried it. So yeah, we make sure the WebSockets are open, and then we iterate over this WebSocket. So that's, I think, the benefit that we get over a stream. This for each, we hover over it, right? Yeah, it's a quality of streams. So when we convert it to a stream, we can pretty much call this for each. I'm going to say, look, for each one, we're going to create like a mini session. So this is starting to approximate a little bit JavaScript code, right? Kind of that like lambda coding, functional programming, whatever you want to call it. We're going to say take the session, and a little arrow. So that's our anonymous function. And we're going to try to do this. We're saying session dot get remote dot send string. So remember, the session dot get remote is like this guy, right? The remote server. So that's like the WebSocket to which that's like the browser tab that the WebSocket is connected from, right? And we're going to send to that string a JSON object which has the user message, which is this thing, which is like create HTML message from sender. It's also included in the stencil code, but just to give you an understanding, they pretty much where is it? They use like this, like this Java Maven dependency, and they were like, it pretty much allows you to like create things in HTML format. So it's like article, which I guess is like an HTML tag, and we're gonna say bold sender says. I guess article like probably wraps it or something. I'm not super sure. Span, and we're gonna add the attribute that it's a timestamp, and then we're gonna add the timestamp. So I think that's like that's this, like this, before making this timestamp. And then using like the p tags, they're gonna like put the message in there. Dot render. And so this is just effectively that instead of sending it back as a JSON, they're sending it back already formatted in HTML. which means that back here in the Java code, right, this is, if we recall, user message. So where's user message, right? So we're just inserting into the chat the user message, right? We don't have to do any like formatting like we do here, right? Where we like take the user out of the JSON list and then add the list elements. Now we're just injecting it directly, right? And that's, I guess, the benefit of this external package, which is called this J2HTML tag creator. Yeah, it creates that as HTML and renders it. And so that's what we're sending back as our user message, and our users list we're sending back as a list of string, which gets converted into a JSON object. And as we saw here, right, it just takes each of them and like converts it into an HTML tag that's surrounded by LIs, so we can see it in this gorgeous format. Yeah, and we try to send that, and otherwise we just print out the exception so we can see if anything's going wrong. Uh, so yeah, that's the very in-depth, maybe not too in-depth, guide for how I made the WebSockets. The URL for my Git repo is, where is it? Uh, I don't know. Let me check. WebSocket. Yeah, WebSockets example. It's this right here. And so I'll link this in the HTML post that I make. And you can see all the code that I added is there, right? So the 3 classes. Yeah, I guess one thing that I think I didn't go over too well was the session object, so I'm just going to recapitulate that. So a session gets sent back every time and is like a function of the browser tab who's sending it, right? So every time we have one of these functions that has a decorator on top of it, we're getting a session, and we can make a pretty, and that session is effectively what we're using as our key for our users map in order to understand who is sending the message. And because we have this user map, when we first create the users, we know exactly what their username is and the room is. So for your more complex projects, if you need WebSockets, you might want to have a user info class, maybe not called user info, right? That stores more intricate information here instead of just the username and the room that they're in. You're probably going to want to keep both of these, but maybe it also has like, I don't know, like their current score or something like that, or something, yeah, something of that sort. Um, and then uh, one final thing is you don't have to broadcast a message every time. So you can just have your code send the WebSocket back, like send a WebSocket message and like do nothing. Like it just like records that or updates some internal variable. Um, doesn't have to do that, but it doesn't have to like broadcast a message back. So I can imagine, right, if you're creating like a game, right, you want to send back um, the user's current score just to, or like, I don't know, yeah, you want to like put down the user's current score because you want to just write it down and see if you need to like, rebalance your game or something like that. You can just do that, write it to the database and not broadcast any message back. So yeah, this was my tutorial on WebSockets. If you guys have any questions, let me know. I'll also be publishing the Git link. So yeah, let me know if this was helpful. Thank you.